listeners who didn't wish to hear about such things should turn off their radio. UFC 304 is just about upon us. Leon Edwards is set to defend his UFC welterweight title against Belal, remember the name, Muhammad. Welcome back to the channel, guys. I'm Paul. Today we're going to take a deep dive into both fighters heading into this welterweight title matchup, and we're going to look at the keys to victory for both men. So first of all, let's look into both fighters, their stats, their records, and see how they stack up. Leon Edwards at 6'2" is going to carry a 3-inch height advantage over his opponent, and he has done this over quite a few opponents so far. He uses his distance very, very well. He also has a 2-inch reach advantage, and that makes him a difficult prospect for a lot of these welterweights. He's a great fighter at fighting from range and managing that distance, and Belal is going to have his hands full trying to close the distance on Edwards coming into this fight. Neither guy has lost in quite a long time. If you discount the no contest that they fought out a couple of years ago, Leon is on a 12-fight winning streak, Belal is on a 9-fight winning streak. Leon's last defeat came in 2015 to Kamaru Usman. In his 12 completed fights since, he's won 9 by decision. There was a submission win over Albert Tumanov in there, and a couple of stoppages over Peter Sabota and of course Kamaru Usman with that famous head kick. Belal's had 9 completed fights in the time since his last defeat against Jeff Neal in 2019. 7 of those have been won by decision. He had that recent stoppage victory over Sean Brady, and he picked up 1 submission over Takashi Sato. The fact that both fighters have eked out so many decisions over the last few years probably tells you why this fight is not maybe drawing the interest or the hype that a lot of welterweight title matchups have in the past. Both fighters are good at getting the job done, but stoppage wins have been a little bit fewer and far between for both guys. A lot of the reason I believe in that is that Leon Edwards, while he's a brilliant technical striker, he doesn't really overthrow a lot of his shots, he doesn't overcommit, and he doesn't really take a lot of risks. He'll happily piece up his opponents, even when he's got a strong advantage. He'll stay tidy, stay technical, stay calm throughout, and he doesn't rush, doesn't get wild, doesn't get sloppy, keeps things tidy. There's pros and cons to that. I mean, if he wanted to take a few more risks, he might have a few more finishes on his record. But then again, he might be looking at it in the case that he might not be where he is right now. He might have lost a couple of fights that he should have won if he had taken those risks. Belal is a very good pressure fighter. In saying that, he uses his wrestling very well, but he doesn't carry a very strong submission threat to go along with that wrestling. And as a striker, he's not the most dynamic, not the most fast twitch, not even the tidiest. He's efficient enough, but sometimes he can be a little bit late to the punch, and he can lose out on the speed advantage to quite a few of these fighters. If we look at some of the names that Leon Edwards has fought in those years since his last loss in 2015, there was a slow, gradual increase in the level of his opponent. Decision victories over Vicente Luque, Brian Barberena. He had that stoppage over Sabota, then a decision over Cowboy Cerrone. He took out Gunnar Nelson, Rafael dos Anjos. And then there was quite a few years where he didn't really fight. There was failed matchups, fights that never came to fruition against Tyron Woodley, Hamzat Chimaev. The no contest against Belal was a very frustrating matchup for both fighters at a time when he just needed a win on his record. Of course, he had that memorable matchup with Nate Diaz in 2021, and then he made his way into that title shot with Kamaru Usman, and one of those memorable UFC moments that we will never forget, that head kick, bang, headshot, dead. That's placed him at the top of the pile at 170 pounds. He looked even more impressive in the rematch, winning much more dominantly over the 5 rounds, and then against Colby Covington, it was a cakewalk really for Leon Edwards in that fight. He strolled through the 5 rounds. Looked like he took his foot off the gas a little towards the end, which we've seen happen a couple of times over 5-round fights with Leon Edwards. But he finds himself holding the belt now and with a target on his back. When we look into Belal's record, of course, very similar record, identical record when it comes to UFC fights. Again, after that defeat to Jeff Neal back in January of 2019, he took out names like Curtis Millender, Takashi Sato, Lyman Good, and then there was a step up in competition. He got past the likes of Diego Lima. Then it was Damian Maia, Stephen Thompson, guys who've been up there fighting for titles before. Vicente Luque. The stoppage win over Sean Brady, I believe, was probably his most impressive performance. And then in his last outing, of course, he managed to injure Gilbert Burns and win a fairly dominant decision over the 3 rounds, which places him top of the pile, #1 contender slot. He's getting the matchup he wants now in Manchester next week. Let's look at how the fighters are going to actually square up and what are their best bets for getting that victory on the night. Leon, I believe, is going to fight southpaw coming into this fight. He is very adept at fighting out of either stance, and depending on the opponent that's in front of him, he can switch things up. He'll prefer sometimes to fight in an orthodox stance, which he did a lot against Colby Covington, anytime Covington was in the southpaw stance. The first time he fought Belal, it was predominantly southpaw all the way. And the reason he's doing this is that Belal is very, very good at attacking his takedowns from his own orthodox stance. He can use his lateral movement to time a rebound off that rear leg and drive forward, and he does this best when he's paired off with an opponent who's also in that orthodox stance. We saw a couple of really good examples of it when he fought Vicente Luque. His timing and his entry is brilliant. He can do it off the other side, he can do it against fighters who are fighting in the southpaw stance, but his strongest work when it comes to takedowns out in the open water happens against similar stance fighters. Now Leon's happy to fight in the southpaw stance because what that does is it opens up some of his best weapons. His left body kick is something that we've seen him use over and over again in that open stance, southpaw v orthodox. As well as having the reach advantage over a lot of these guys, his legs are ridiculously long. If you look at him when he's paired off with some of these welterweights, he's got very, very long legs, so he can use that from a safe distance. And the open stance, of course, opens up a lot of target for him to hit. He also has the option of switching it up and using that head kick, which he hides very well behind the feint for the jab. That's the kick he knocked out Kamaru Usman with. But he also caught Belal clean with this kick in their first fight. Now Belal has a hell of a chin on him. Almost never gets stopped. He's really tough. He's hard as nails. But his bell was rung with that high kick, and I think Leon Edwards will be banking on that becoming a valuable weapon in this fight. But definitely Leon fighting in the southpaw stance is going to take away one of Belal's best weapons. Leon will also be looking to make Belal fight moving backwards, so Belal does his best work when he's the one pushing forward, he's the one pushing the pace. He likes to get people with their back against the fence. When he fought Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, he was really able to implement his wrestling, although the difference there is that was in the much smaller cage. Now Thompson fights a lot out of that southpaw stance, but Belal was able to work those takedowns against the fence, so he was able to dive in, get to the hips, and get him to the fence and then work from there and really make Thompson carry his weight, ride those hips and do a lot of damage from there. He's not really going to find that as easy in the larger octagon against a fighter like Leon Edwards, who has the space behind him to step off, switch stances, move laterally, move diagonally. Leon has a massive speed advantage over Belal. Now he has this against a lot of the fighters at welterweight. We saw it against Kamaru Usman, we saw it against Colby Covington, but I think it's going to be heightened against Belal Muhammad, who is just not a fast twitch athlete. In their first matchup, he was able to lead the dance. He was the first one getting the shots off. He was beating them to the punch every time. And what this did, it made Belal reactionary rather than proactionary. So he was struggling to get his attacks going. He could not push Leon back because every time he tried to advance, he was getting met with shots. And I think it's going to play out very similarly this time around. As I mentioned earlier, Leon is so well balanced in his striking. He never overthrows, never overcommits, so it's hard to get him to make mistakes. He'll stay balanced even when he's switching between stances. He can throw seamlessly as he switches. So you contrast this to a fighter like Jiří Procházka, who switches stances a lot, but Procházka always has to seemingly take a moment to reset when he does switch stances. And when he fought Alex Pereira in that last fight, Pereira was doing a great job of timing those calf kicks over their two fights. When Jiří Procházka switches stances, he would take that moment to reset, and then the calf kick would come right before he was able to shift back into gear. So this is what frustrated him into getting sloppy, getting reckless and charging forward onto that counter left. Edwards does this brilliantly. He's able to just switch from no matter what stance he's in, and he seems to be equally effective off either side. Even when the wrestling does happen against the fence, we saw in those last couple of fights that Leon Edwards has grown really as a counter wrestler. He's very good at patiently building a base, getting back up. He can limit his damage from there, the damage that he's taking. He's good at not just recklessly trying to get up and maybe giving up his back or giving up his neck, but he can build his base patiently, get back to his feet. He can create some space, make some room to get himself out of there and circle back to the middle of the octagon. As for Belal, what he needs to do is make this fight ugly. He is not going to beat Leon Edwards on a technical or a skill level, a tactical level. He's going to have to make him suffer, make him move backwards, make him tired, make him make mistakes. He did not manage to do it in the first fight because, as I said, Leon was just managing and controlling the distance and he had the timing of Belal, but he's going to have to find a way to make it ugly this time around. He can't afford to get into a kickboxing match with Leon Edwards because Edwards is a far superior striker. When Belal does manage to work his pressure game on fighters, he uses his lateral movement very, very well to cut off the cage. He never follows fighters. He'll stay out in front of them and move laterally so that they always have their back to the fence and they find it difficult to circle back out. He needs to use that fence if he's going to get some takedowns on Leon Edwards. Because as I said, his takedowns out in the open water, they work best from his orthodox stance against a fighter also in an orthodox stance. Edwards isn't going to give him that option, so he's going to need to get Edwards moving backwards, get his back close to that fence, and then work from there. When it comes to striking, some of the best weapons that Belal has is those kicks to the body. He does have a lot of power in them off either side. We saw in the last fight against Gilbert Burns when he was probably being cautious about being taken down on account of Gilbert Burns' grappling pedigree, that he switched up stances a hell of a lot more than he usually does. He might try to implement this tactic this time around to keep Edwards guessing. Either way, I think it's a hell of a fight for both fighters, a hell of a test. Leon Edwards, I think, has all the skills he needs to get the job done here against Belal Muhammad. I think statistically, you look at both guys, they eke out a lot of decisions. I think Edwards is going to win comfortably, dominantly. It's most likely going to be a 5-round decision, but that head kick, due to the height, the range, I think that could very well be a dangerous weapon for Edwards. Again, Belal has that strong-ass chin. He very rarely gets stopped, so could be easier said than done putting him out. But I think it's a big fight for Edwards if he can get past this one. There's a whole slew of contenders waiting. Shavkat Rakhmonov, Ian Machado, Gary. There's some guys there in the welterweight top 10 with his name on their lips, and they want that next shot. So let's see what happens after UFC 304. That's all for today, guys. Don't forget to like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments below who you think is going to come out on top in the main event at UFC 304. And let me know who you think is going to get the next title shot and face the winner of that main event. See you next time.